The monster is none other than Red Herring. Welcome to another episode of the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo, the podcast where we delve into the mystery of Scooby-Doo media, getting clues from people who helped bring our favorite mystery-solving dog to life on various platforms, and maybe eating some Scooby snacks along the way. I'm your host, Alexa Lawler.
Scooby-Doo, where are you?
And it would have been mine if it hadn't been for those meddling kids.
Gang, we've just been handed our next mystery.
Blasted meddling kids.
I'd like to start off this episode with a special mention to Joe Ruby. Joe was one of the co-creators of Scooby-Doo, and he sadly passed away on Wednesday, August 26th, at the age of 87. We wouldn't have Scooby-Doo without him, and to steal from Scooby-Doo's or Scooby-Don'ts, which is also a great Scooby podcast if you haven't listened to them yet, but I think they put it best in their tweet, quote, "He might be gone, but his creations are immortal." Rest in peace, Joe, and condolences to family, friends, and all who knew him. For the interview this episode, we have Laren Bright, who worked as a writer and story editor on A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. Let's just get right into it. Hi, Laren. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
I'm glad to be here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. If you're up for it, I'd like to start off with a quick 3-question trivia game.
Okay, do I get points if I win and lose points if I don't have the right answers?
I haven't really been playing for points, but if you'd like to.
No, that's fine. Let's see what you got. Go ahead.
So question 1, true or false, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo aired its first episode in September 1988.
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I would say that's true.
That is true.
Good thing.
And question 2,
Uh-huh.
in A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, after Velma said Jinkies, one of the other members of the gang would say, Velma said Jinkies. Can you complete the rest of that line?
No, I can't. You complete it.
It must be a clue.
Oh, right, there you go. It's been a while.
Definitely. Question 3 is multiple choice. Which 3 of the following are all villains from A Pup Named Scooby-Doo?
Oh boy.
A, the headless skateboarder, Stein, and Stinkweed. Or B, just a general scarecrow, the Black Knight, and the Cheese Monster.
Oh, A.
That is right. Yes, it is A.
Good. I remember Stein.
And to start off the general questions, what's your relationship to Scooby-Doo? Did you watch it all?
No, I mean, I'd seen the odd episode. I wasn't particularly a fan, but you want the kind of the history of how we ended up with the show.
Sure.
Great. Well, here's what was going on. Hanna Barbera at that time, and that's the late '80s, had, I think, the largest stable of writers of any studio around, and there were I think 34 writers at that time, and I was number 33. And they had a kind of a situation where the writers could jump in on certain shows. And what happened was a guy named Tom Ruger, who did the first season of Pup Scooby, as I recall, I think he went to Warner Brothers Animation. So they had an opening. And the guy that actually brought me into to work at Hanna Barbera, a fellow named Lane Reichert, he was a very strategic thinker, and he saw that as an opportunity. So he jumped in and grabbed the opportunity to story edit Pup Scooby, and so we came in. I'm pretty sure it was the second season, and that's how we kind of got moving on that show, and we did it for a few years, as I recall.
And just generally, how did you come to work in animation?
Oh, that's a funny story in a way. I mean, I was old for animation at that point. I was like 42, and but Lane Riker, who I just mentioned, I knew his mom, and he was doing cartoons. I mean, hand drawn cartoons, static cartoons. And I saw a few of them, and I sent him a fan letter. I said, "This is great." He was, I think, 22, maybe at that time, 23, and we struck a friendship. And one night we had gone out, my wife and I and Lane and his wife went out. We had gone out to dinner, actually to see his mom in a dinner theater thing or something. And he said, "You're funny. You ought to be writing scripts." And I said, "I don't know anything about writing scripts." And he said, "Well, okay, just keep it in mind." So anyway, about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks later, he gives me a call and he said, "Hey, we're doing a pitch meeting for a show named Snorks. You want to come?" So I said, "Sure." So I went down to Hanna Barbera and sat in a room with, I don't know, 20 people, and I felt like I was very intimidated because I didn't know anything about what was going on. And um, I went home. He said, "Okay, go home and write some premises." And I said, "What are premises?" He said, "Well, they're kind of story ideas." And I said, "Okay, fine." So I went home and dashed off some premises and took them in, and he looked over my list. I probably had 8 or 10 of them, and he said, "Oh, okay, I like this one and this one." He says, "Okay, go home and write an outline for this." And I said, "What's an outline?" And he said, "Well, here." And he gave me a stack of outlines, and I went home and read a few of them and and wrote up an outline and took it back to his office. And he said, "Yeah, that's good." He says, "Okay, turn it into a script." And I said, "What's a script?" And he said, he gave me another pile of papers that were scripts. And I went home and turned my outline into what I thought looked pretty much like a script. And I took it back to his. There was several days passed, and I went back to his office, and he said, "Hang on." He said, "Don't leave. Let me take a look at this. I'll be able to tell right away whether you got it or not." And he looked at it and he kind of shook his head and he says, "Let's go to lunch." So we went to lunch, and over lunch he said he told me what I needed to do to turn what I had done into an actual script. And so I did that and took it back. He said, "Yeah, this is a script." He says, "Go now, do the same thing with this story idea." And so I turned in a couple of stories and turned them into scripts. And he said, and it made more money than I had ever made before, because I think it was like $1,700 or something like that for a script. And one day he said, "I'm going to see if I can get you hired over here." And like I said, they had 1 million writers on staff. But he went to the business affairs guy, and he said, "I'd like you to hire this guy, Laren Bright." And he said, "Well, we don't really need any more writers." And he said, "Hey, he'll work for cheap." And it was like, I think I started at like $700 a week. This is 1980, whatever, 87 it was. And and the guy said, "He'll work that cheap?" And Lane said, "Yeah." And to me, it was like tons of money, because I was doing freelance writing up at that point, and it was sporadic. And so I got hired on to Hanna Barbera on a pretty much week to week basis. And after, I don't know, 6, 8 months, they hired me full time, and I was able to join the union at that point, and I wrote animation from then on for 7 years. So that's how I got in.
And was writing cartoons something that you had ever thought that you might do?
Never ever. It was just my life. My life has been kind of sort of like that. I mean, where I don't have any particular plan, but things present, and then they last for as long. I worked in animation for 7 years, almost to the day in a way, and I found that my life goes in 2 year or 7 year cycles if you want to get a little woo about things. And so no, I hadn't thought about animation. I loved comic books when I was a kid, and I liked cartoons, but I surely didn't know anything about it. And it took me a long time before I felt really confident of what I was doing, even though I was, I would turn in scripts and there would be minimal editing and it was really fun to watch them turn into actual cartoons. But it was not unlike there were three of us working on Pup Scooby together: Lane Reichert, myself, and a guy named Bill Matheny who recently passed away. He was a young guy too. Anyway, Bill knew everything about animation. I mean, he was a walking encyclopedia, and but I just kind of got sucked in there and said, "Wow, this is an interesting ride. Let's go."
What was the atmosphere like working at Hanna Barbera?
Hanna Barbera was a fabulous place to work. It was really wonderful. Bill, Hanna, Joe Barbera were still there when I got there. Now they had sold the company to some large conglomerate company, but apparently they were allowed to run it, and they were awesome. And because of the way they treated writers, particularly Mr. Barbera was very protective of the writers, and we would go in on we would get a contract, year-to-year contract. Whether you sign a contract for a year, when your contract was up, they make you an offer, and they offer you $100 raise or $200 raise, and you say that's ridiculous, and you say I want $1,000 raise, and you'd end up somewhere with $300-400 more, and it was, but the atmosphere at Hanna Barbera was very collegial. I mean, the writers were in a particular wing of the building on Coenga Boulevard, and if you got stuck on a story, you walk down the hall and pop your head into somebody's office and say, "Hey, I'm stuck. Can we talk about this?" And it's sure. It was really great, and I left Hanna Barbera in I think 90 or 91 to work on Batman the Animated Series over at Warner Brothers Animation, which was a whole different story. It was very corporate and a lot of political games, and it wasn't fun for me. Other people probably thrive on it, but I sure didn't. And then I ended up going back to Hanna Barbera to work on Captain Planet. And when I came back, people I barely knew were coming into my office saying, "Welcome back," and there were sometimes folks there had their children and grandchildren working there. That was the kind of atmosphere that Hanna and Barbera had set up, and it was a joy to go to work at Hanna Barbera. Really was. It was just super.
And do you have any fun stories or memories from working there?
Well, let's see. Now let's see if I can think of any clean ones. Let me think. Fun stories. The one thing I remember was in the artists' wing. The artists had their own wing. It was like actually in a separate building. You had to walk a ways to get there. And being artists, they all had all kinds of different stuff, different art hanging up on the walls. And when the company that owned Hanna Barbera, when I was there, sold to another company, when another company came in, they were a lot more stiff-necked about things, and they went into the artist wing and made them take down all their drawings, which were, if you ever look at comic book drawings, especially girls, you can imagine what was the content. I'm trying to think of it. I can't think of any really funny stories in Hanna Barbera. I'll give you another sense of atmosphere though. Animation writers, we pretty much knew each other. It, whether you worked at Hanna Barbera, Warner Brothers, or Disney, or Deke, and which were the major studios at that time, and there was a woman at Hanna Barbera named Barbara Simon who was in charge of the writers. She kind of was the mom for all the writers, and she was just awesome. And if if we were going to go out for lunch, we'd just say, Barbara, we're going out for lunch. We're back later, and whenever later was. And I remember going out with the guys. We have a lunch. We'd meet up with some of the guys from Disney, and we'd be sitting eating lunch, and they'd be watching the clock. And I'll tell you, they had 1 hour for lunch, and that's what they got. And if they didn't finish their lunch, they were still out of there and going back to the office. So that was one of the really cool things about working at HP. One of in the process of producing the shows, we would get the animation. It takes, back in those days, it took forever for animating. So we would write the script, and then I don't remember how long it was, but it's like months. And then we would get a chance to look at the thing. And the first thing you look at had no sound effects and no music. And it was just really interesting to look at it and to see it. And then to see when they fleshed it out. And it was really quite a process. And the other thing at Hanna Barbera that was really cool was when they would record the episodes, we would go down. The writers, they would invite us in to the recording sessions, so we could we could comment, we could give notes to the voice artists, saying no, this needs more emphasis on this part, or what's underneath all of this is this, so you can convey that. And it was, we were really part of the whole process, and it was really exciting in a lot of ways, and we got to meet a lot of cool people too.
And what was it like to be able to be present at those recording sessions and, see your words come to life?
It was very cool. It was most of the voice artists, maybe all of them. I don't know if I can think of any that don't fit this. Were really, really neat people, and very, very open, to hearing what we had to say, and we were respectful. We weren't making changes a lot, but they would read through the script. They would record the script, then we would give them notes, and they would go back and make changes where we would suggest changes, and it was just fun. It was, all of it was fun, but it was fun to be able to do that, to sit and watch. I remember when we were doing Fender Bender 500, there were about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 16 characters. And some of the voice actors at that time did 2 or 3 voices maybe, but the room would, the recording room studio would be filled with people. And I remember that the voice director at the time, Gordon Hunt, made a comment to one of the other old-timer guys that was there looking in the room, seeing 10 people sitting in the room, and he said, 10 years ago, there'd be one person in that room doing all those voices. That was Mel Blanc, who did the voice of Bugs Bunny and people like that. But he did, apparently for Hanna Barbera, he did all those voices when he was alive. After he died, they had to. Each character had its own voice actor. So that's a kind of an interesting little tidbit.
What was it like to write for A Pup Named Scooby-Doo specifically, with it being, such a different incarnation of Scooby?
Tom Ruger, the guy that story edited the first season, had pretty much set an environment for Scooby, and um, we stayed pretty much true to that. And the way it worked when we were writing Pup Scooby was that Lane and Bill and I would sit down and we'd break stories. And others we would come up with some ideas. They really were into, and I very much agree, but I was brand new at this point. So they were always looking for wacky stuff. And I didn't know how far we could push the envelope, but they were pretty comfortable pushing the envelope fairly far. And so anyway, we would break these stories and kind of flesh them out, and then one of us would go write it, or they'd bring in a freelance writer, and we would sit. There were different styles of story editing, and the style we used was is we would break the story with the writer and spend maybe 2-3 hours going through, so that when they came back, and then the way the process was we'd come up with a story idea, and then we would send the writer out to do it, and then they would come back with an outline. We would read much like I had done with Lane when I first started. We'd read the outline, make any kind of correction, and then they would go back and write the script. The advantage of doing it, other guys would just say, "Hey, here's a premise. Go come back with an outline or a script," and then they would spend hours and hours and hours fixing it to fit the vision that they had. By investing the time in advance, we were able to. When the outline came in, there was very little that was off track from what we had in our vision of what we wanted the story to be, and we could make the changes on the outline. So when the script came back, it was pretty much exactly what we wanted, and it just, for me, doing it that way, we put, in a sense, we put the hard work in at the beginning, and then we could coast with the rest of it because we were getting what we wanted.
And what was the timeline of how long you would have to work on the story for an episode?
That's a really, really good question. I think, it's a good question because it gives you kind of an insight into how the cartoon industry was going at that time. I think, if my memory serves, we had about a week to go from story idea to finished script. And on very rare occasion, we would be able to put a script down for a week and then come back to it. And it was just like, what a luxury, because when you come back with new eyes, and you can really plus the script and plus some of the little gags and things like that. But in general, we didn't have that luxury. And at one time, I was working on a show. It was a short show. It was a 5-minute show, Fender Bender 500, that took all of the Hanna Barbera key characters, all the major characters, and put them all together in a race. And we had to have a different race every week. And I worked on that show with another story editor named Christina Lucky. And I think we had to turn out, it started out, for the first few weeks, we had to turn out 3 scripts a week. And then after that, it was like 4 scripts a week. And so, we used to call it a sausage factory. You're just grinding out scripts.
And how long would it take you roughly to write one of those scripts?
Well, like I said, we had a week, so we could do it. I remember back in the day, let's see, I guess Ronald Reagan was president, and his wife was into the Just Say No to Drugs campaign. and I guess Mr. Barbera and Mr. Hanna were at some event. I don't know, some big political event, and apparently Mrs. Reagan said something like, "Yeah, I'd really like to have a cartoon about just say no," and so one of the guys, the studio guys said, "Gee, well, we own a cartoon studio. We'll do that." And I think we wrote a Just Say No special, and we wrote it almost over the weekend. It was something like that. So that's how fast we could get it. Now keep in mind also, some scripts were 20-minute scripts, which were half-hour scripts, and some scripts were 15-minute scripts. They're actually, I think, 11 and a half or 12 minutes. So, depending on the length of the script, that has a big impact on the length of time it took to write it.
And generally, would you be working on one show at a time, or would you kind of go between the various different shows that Hanna Barbera would be working on at one time?
That's another really good question. No, when we would be working on one show at a time until we completed that, and then we'd go on to the next show. There was that was one of the cool things about being a writer at Hanna Barbera, because we had a year's contract. We would go from show to show, but then there was a period where they weren't producing shows. Each year there was once you finished the season, there was a lull, and that was the time when writers could come up with their own ideas or develop new shows, or people would come with show ideas, and we would work up development, a Bible, and maybe a script or two, or a bunch of story ideas at any rate, and pitch them to the network. So that's how networks came up with what shows they were going to use for the next season. We'd go out and pitch to them, and then then the networks would decide. The one thing about Pup Scooby was the head of animation programming at ABC was a woman named Jenny Trias, and she loved Scooby, A Pup Scooby. So it was always great working with her, because she liked the show, and so consequently she liked us, and so it was kind of neat.
And what was it like to work on like a childhood version of those iconic characters in the Scooby-Doo gang?
Well, interestingly, I worked also on Flintstone Kids, which was a similar process. Taking iconic characters and aging them down to kids, and it was a lot of fun. In a lot of ways, I think I prefer Pup Scooby to the actual Scooby-Doo. And then there was also Scrappy or somebody. There was they came up with another character that had a kind of a short life, and that was also part of that evolution. But it was neat working at Hanna Barbera with, like you said, iconic characters that we knew the characters, but we didn't know them as kids, and so we had a chance to really develop them. They're the same characters, but they're different, and it was kind of fun.
And did you have a favorite character to write for in that style?
I think we probably liked Shaggy a lot. They were all kind of cool characters. I mean, Velma was kind of cool too. Maybe I would say of them all, I mean, aside from Scooby, Velma and Shaggy were probably my favorites.
And the childhood version of classic characters was a pretty big trend at the time. Why do you think that formula worked so well?
Well, boy, that's an interesting question. Um, I think it worked well, for one thing, because uh, the characters were known, and the characters were liked to start with, the adult characters, the adult version of the characters. And with Scooby particularly, I mean, it was pretty formulaic, but it was a fun formula, and with Scooby particularly, we could just get ridiculous, um, with the monsters and the villains and all that stuff. But I think that we had we had momentum with the adult characters, and we were able to be fun enough, aging the kids down, so that younger kids would like it. And I'm going to suspect that maybe some adult, uh, you know, parents of the kids kind of got off on watching the characters do things they did as young kids. So that'd be my guess.
Were there any challenges for writing for Scooby at all?
No more challenges than just writing an animation period. I mean, the challenge, was the schedule, and always. Um, I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it was. We would keep working. I mean, you had to kind of keep working to get the scripts out at the right on the timing that the studio needed it, and that's probably the biggest challenge. Because the environment at Hanna Barbera was so, the word that comes to mind is positive. It was just a really positive work environment, um, and such an easy going place and an easy place to work with. That minimized, I think, a lot of the challenges that exist in the writing business. I mean, it's funny. Live action writers look down on animation writers, but the way I always looked at it was, you know, with children's cartoons, we're really shaping the future in a lot of ways, because what we portray in our cartoons is what kids start to look for in reality and start to create in reality. I mean, I for Lane had a company that he was doing some publishing, and he asked me to, because I had been working in advertising prior to that, and he asked me to come up with a slogan, or I don't even know what you call it, but anyway, it was like a statement of our philosophy, and what I came up with was, what we inspire the children to believe is what the world will become. And I always felt like that was a responsibility that I had when we were writing, was to present positive images. We always, in fact, now this is 87, 88, 89, thereabouts. We always made it a point. I think that in Flintstone Kids, the mayor was a black woman. We always were very respectful of women in the cartoons and of minorities. We always tried to include minorities in a positive light and stuff like that. And that was just, to me, an opportunity to make a contribution other than just writing entertainment. And so that's why I laugh when sitcom writers, would kind of sneer at us or look down their noses at us. It's like, hey, we're planting seeds for the future here. What are you doing?
And you mentioned being inclusive, but what are some of the other positive messages that you would try to get through in the cartoons that you were writing?
Well, probably a really good example. The last 3 years of my career in animation, I worked on a show called Captain Planet, and um, the tagline for Captain Planet was "The power is yours," and it was an environmental show. And Captain Planet was the world's first environmental superhero, and the message that we always put in, I mean, in every episode was, "Hey, look, here's what's going on, and here are things that you can do, you kids can do." And we always tried to, in that show, but in pretty much everything we did, we always tried to present positive imagery for children, and And that was why when I went to work at Batman, I found that a real challenge because they didn't care about that stuff. They 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 wanted sort of dark and angst-ridden. I mean, that's who Batman was at that time, uh, and the Dark Knight kind of imagery, and it's like, no, that's not that's not the legacy I want to leave. Um, so uh, so there, I guess at the time they were calling it pro-social content, where you show positive stuff about the environment, positive stuff about gender, that kind of thing. And so that was something that personally I always tried to um, include, and most of the people that I worked with similarly tried to do that.
And why was it important to you to be able to put those messages in the programming that you were working on?
Well, because I was aware that our primary responsibility was to entertain, but telling any story does more than entertain. It sets up ideas, it sets up mindsets, it sets up ways of thinking, um, and like I said, I mean, it sets up belief in the way the world is, and so my own ethical philosophical system just required that I present always a positive message. Um, that's I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, in the writing that I do now, which is mostly books, I'm always looking to have a positive message in there. Yeah, you want to have action and adventure, and you have to have tension and conflict. I mean, that's part of the story. Um, but at the same time, it can be done in a positive way or a less positive way, and I my preference is a positive way.
And have you paid much attention to animation these days? Do you think that programs today still have that aspect?
That's interesting. I really have not paid a lot of attention to animation when I left that industry. Um, Partly because the nature of the whole industry changed. I mean, Saturday mornings cartoons, I mean, almost disappeared. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be there pretty much in the heyday of children's animation. I mean, and that dominated Saturday morning, and that all changed pretty much. I've watched a little animation, um, and now on things like Netflix and Amazon Prime and places like that, um, there are a more adult animation than kids animation. I don't know what children's animation is doing these days, really. I think there's always an underlying intention to be positive in children's animation, and that kind of shifted as when they started writing animation for older kids. I think they went off in a kind of a different direction. I mean, I think Batman the animated series is a good example of that. It just got darker and less fun. It wasn't when I read Batman comic books when I was a kid. It was fun, and when I watched the Batman the animated series stories, they were exciting and they were adventurous, but I would not put the word fun in that description.
And can you elaborate on why you decided to leave the animation industry?
I didn't decide to leave animation. Animation decided to leave me. It was the strangest thing. I had a fairly impressive resume with high profile shows, including Batman. That was a very prestigious show to have worked on, and I worked on the first year of that. Um, One of the things that happened was that the last 3 years of my animation career was working with Captain Planet. For whatever reason, Captain Planet was not looked upon as a prestigious show. Now it's interesting because at one time it was had the largest global viewership of any animated show ever. We had huge presence overseas, but it was not a show that it was almost a dead end kind of a show. For me, it was a dead end kind of a show. I worked with a woman named Sean Derrick. We were the story editors, and we worked together on all the shows when we started working on Captain Planet. And she went on and did very well. For me, it was just weird. I couldn't, not to get too woo-woo on you, but actually what I think happened is my karma finished with animation, because with all the shows, I mean, I've got 3 Emmy nominations. It's not like I was, some hack writer. I had recognition, I had good shows, and I could not get a job. It was the weirdest thing for about a year and a half. I was trying and nothing was showing up. And finally, I realized, wait a minute, I'm not an animation writer. I'm a writer, and I do animation, but I have other areas that I can work in as well. And so I just turned to those instead of beating my head against the wall trying to get jobs in animation. But and I mean, in ultimately at the end of the day, looking back, it was like, well, that was kind of lucky that I had a broader range than just writing animation, because the animation business changed entirely. And I think it was, a lot of the guys that were working in it, I think had to move on. I think. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that's what I think.
And where did you go after your stint in animation?
Well, there were 2 or 3 years that were very, very lean years for me, and it was just strange. And like I say, then one day I literally woke up saying, "Wait a minute, I can do other stuff." So I started doing what I had done prior to animation, which was writing advertising stuff, and I found that writing animation really enhanced my advertising writing. And then I ended up hooked up with a woman who, this was in right around the late 90s, and self-publishing was just coming into popularity. But self-published books look like crap. And I hooked up with this woman who, she called herself a book shepherd, and she would shepherd people through the process of producing a book that when it came off the press, you looked at that book and you could not tell the books that she helped people produce from a book produced by Doubleday or one of the big publishers. And she and I were working together, and she would have her clients hire me to write all the promotional stuff, which would include the book title, the subtitle, the back cover, and what has become, it used to be the flaps, now call it, the Amazon description. And that's the stuff that really sells the book. So that's what, and occasionally she would have me edit if the book needed editing, so I would edit. So that's, my career took a turn in that direction. And then I've co-written a couple of books with young adult fantasy kind of stuff. And so I had a kind of a broad spectrum career writing animation, promotional stuff, and publishing stuff, stuff that was published, books, things like that.
And are you still working at that today?
I am. I'm currently working on a book. It's really an amazing book. It's about transcendent leadership. Talking, and this is for corporate CEOs. I mean, big, heavy-duty folks, and it's about loving leadership. I mean, believe it or not, it's coming around to help corporations be more humane places to work. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. Although I have I have in my head a very young children's book, a children's picture book that when I finish this editing part thing, I'm gonna jump in and write it. I'm kind of excited about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And moving back to Scooby, what was your favorite thing about working on A Pup Named Scooby-Doo?
Oh man, there were so many things that I really liked about doing that. I loved the process of working with Lane and Bill. Uh, I mean, here's these two young guys, and I'm in my mid 40s, and I'm the young, I'm the least experienced, but they were really kind, and they were fun to work with, and so there was that. I loved working just in the environment at Hanna Barbera, and also it was fun working uh, with the folks from ABC because they're, you know, the process of writing scripts would be you write the outline, you send it to the network. The network would come back with notes. So you address the notes and write the script, and then you send it to the network, and the network would come back. Both the network and the studio executive would come back, and so you're dealing. Here you got writers who have written scores, if not hundreds, of scripts, dealing with executives who've taken a weekend class on script on writing and are telling us what to do. And sometimes it could get unpleasant. I mean, when I say unpleasant, I should, well, like it was not. Sometimes it was not fun. With Scooby, that was never the case. That we were all on the same page. We were happy to make changes that the network wanted or the executives wanted because we were all looking at the same thing, and their comments and notes were generally on target. And I mean, sometimes we say, I don't know, that makes us any better, but we'll accommodate that. Sometimes on other shows the executive come back and says, make this funnier. So, well, what does that mean? What we think this is funny. If you don't, you got to tell us what it is that'll make it funnier because we think this is pretty funny. So working on Pup Scooby, it was just fun. It was a party all the time. And I don't mean we didn't work hard, but it was the atmosphere was always up and fun and funny. So that's what I liked about it.
Do you have a favorite episode that you wrote at all?
Oh man, there was one, and I don't remember the name of it, but it featured Davey the Letterman, and it was a game show thing. God, I don't even remember the whole thing, but it was something. It was something like that. I liked that show a lot.
And A Pup Named Scooby-Doo had a lot of more wackier ghosts and monsters. Do you have one out of the whole show that sticks out in your mind now?
The one that I remember was the one in your trivia question was Chicken Stein, and I couldn't even tell you what the story was about, but I just remembered the monster, and I thought it was a funny monster. Oh, I think the headless skateboard guy was pretty good too.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
And out of your time at Hanna-Barbera, do you have a favorite show that you worked on at all?
I really liked Captain Planet, despite the fact that, like I say, it was not highly regarded. I I I just felt like that was the one that was making. I mean, it's nice to have your work acknowledged as actually making a contribution in addition to uh, to just entertaining. And Captain Planet, that was its whole franchise was to educate in an entertaining way. I mean, I guess it was called edutainment, um, but the message to me uh, of Captain Planet about environmental stuff, how to be responsible. It wasn't like progress is bad or capitalism is bad. It was that greed is where the problem was coming in to create problems. And I still think that's a good message, and I think it's a particularly good message for today. So I really liked working on. I mean, and just for a little history, Captain Planet was the brainchild of Ted Turner. Ted Turner ultimately owned Hanna Barbera. Oh, he owned Hanna Barbera at one time. Uh, Later, but it started out at a different studio called Deke, and then when they brought it when Ted Turner bought Hanna Barbera, they bought the program back from Deke and brought it to Hanna Barbera, and that's when I ended up. That was at the end of my year at Batman, and so I ended up getting hired back in Hanna Barbera to work on that show, and anyway, that's the story of that.
And when it comes to Scooby-Doo, why do you think that a cartoon about a mystery-solving dog has held up for over 50 years now?
Boy, that's scary, isn't it? Over 50 years, wow. Uh, you know, it's just, I think it's just a really good premise with some really good characters that people enjoy. They little quirks, jinkies and stuff like that, just works. And apparently it works from generation to generation. I mean, and so uh, what if anybody could really distill it down and say, oh, this is what makes shows become classics, they could make a fortune. But I don't think anybody knows. I think they just hit on it with Scooby, and yeah, I mean, because Scooby has outlasted some of the really more high profile ones. I mean, the Flintstones, stuff like that. Scooby persists. I don't know. Maybe it's just a great idea.
I think that covers all of the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at all, whether it be some more stories or anything like that?
Gee whiz. Uh, I just no. I guess I'd like to say that I really felt like it was a privilege and an honor to work in animation. When I did it, I learned tons um, doing that, and I as I've kind of been saying all along, I can't say enough about working at Hanna Barbera and the people there and the whole philosophy of that company, which obviously has disappeared now, has been absorbed into other big corporate things, uh, but it was really an experience that I'm grateful for in my life of having had the opportunity to do that.
And just before we end here, do you have any recent projects you'd like to promote at all?
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, I really kind of don't. I can tell you, I recently uh, finished a book called I co-wrote um, with a woman named Grace Allison a book called Einstein's Compass that I'm particularly proud of. I really I like the message of the book, and I like the way that we handled it. It was really kind of her story, and I contributed uh, to make it um, more exciting, I guess I would say. Uh, and uh, and I worked on another book called Golden Voyages, young children's book that I was pretty happy with also. So those two I would say are probably the two I really appreciate having the opportunity to mention, Alexis.
And if people are interested, is there a way for people to get in contact with you or follow what you're up to?
Sure. Uh, Probably the easiest way is just to go to my website, which is larenbright.com, and get a sense of what I'm doing and where I'm at. And I'm available on email, Laren at larenbright.com. If you know anybody wants to chat about stuff, I'm around.
Perfect. Well, I think that covers everything. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Laren.
Alexa, I really appreciate it.
And that concludes today's episode. Another huge thank you to Laren Bright for taking the time to chat with me. For more groovy content, be sure to check at Unmasked SD on Twitter, at Unmasked SD Podcast on Instagram, or at unmaskedsdpodcast.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook under the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo podcast. If you like this episode and want to hear more, also make sure to check those social media channels or the website. Or you can listen to older episodes wherever you like to get your podcast fix. Thanks for listening, and keep an ear out for the next episode. Scooby-Dooby-Doo!